The morning Aspen Ridge learned the cost of silence began with a coffee cup shattering across a diner floor. A 78-year-old widow named Ilara Wilson had come in for eggs, toast, and the kind of ordinary peace people stop noticing until a bully rips it apart. Cade Jennings, the town's favorite coward in a work jacket and dirty boots, slapped her hard enough to send her to the tiles in front of a room full of frozen faces. Then the bell over the door rang, and everything changed. Ilara's son walked in, a Navy SEAL with cold, steady eyes, and beside him stood a Belgian Malinois that did not bark, did not flinch, and did not look away. If you've ever wondered what happens when evil finally meets a man who does not fear it, tell me what time you're watching. Like, share, and subscribe to K9 and SEAL Stories, and now the story begins. Ilara Wilson had lived in Aspen Ridge long enough to remember when men still took their hats off for older women, and when a person could walk into Mountaintop Diner without feeling the mood of the whole town before hearing a single word. Widowhood had not made Ilara soft. It had made Ilara quiet, and quiet was often mistaken for weakness by the wrong kind of man. At 78, Ilara still rose before sunrise, still folded the same dish towel over the same oven handle, still checked the weather from the kitchen window before pulling on a burgundy wool coat that had lasted longer than most marriages in that county. The little house on Juniper Lane held more memory than money. Ilara's husband had died 12 years earlier after a lifetime of ranch work and a final short fight with cancer. Since then, Ilara had learned how to live with absence the way mountain people learn to live with winter, by respecting it, never dramatizing it, and never pretending it would not return. The drive into town took 11 minutes if the roads were clear. That morning, the peaks north of Aspen Ridge wore late-season snow like old scars, and the sky over Main Street had the pale silver look that promised wind by noon. Ilara parked the Buick in the same angled spot beside the diner and stepped out carefully, one gloved hand on the doorframe, the other holding a handbag that contained reading glasses, peppermint mints, and an envelope of receipts that needed organizing later. Inside, Mountaintop Diner smelled like bacon grease, coffee, maple syrup, and years of people who had come in tired and left a little steadier. Doris Hale, the owner, looked up from behind the register. Doris was in the early stages of 63, with an auburn gray bob, a forest green apron, and the kind of face that made people tell the truth when they had not planned to. "Booth 7, same as always?" Doris asked. Ilara smiled. "Unless somebody important outranks breakfast." Mia Torres, the young waitress, brought coffee before Ilara had fully settled in. Mia was 26, saving money for nursing school, and smart enough to know which regulars tipped well and which ones tipped in conversation because they had nothing else to give. The first half hour moved with the gentle machinery of an ordinary weekday. A plow driver came in for biscuits. 2 linemen argued about football. An elderly couple split pancakes without speaking because the marriage was old enough not to require performance. Ilara ordered scrambled eggs, wheat toast, and half an order of hash browns. A small local paper lay folded beside the sugar caddy, and the front page carried a smiling photo of Mayor Garrison Thorne under a headline about redevelopment and new economic opportunity. Ilara had long since learned that men who used the word opportunity most loudly usually meant it for themselves. Aspen Ridge had been changing in ugly little ways for years. Old properties got reassessed until owners could not keep up. Contracts went to the same names. Repairs took longer in the poorer part of town. Sheriff Brody Kent seemed to know exactly when not to notice. Ilara did not speak much about any of that in public, but Ilara noticed. Cade Jennings entered just after 9 with cold air and trouble. Everyone in the diner looked up in that subtle, embarrassed way people do when they do not want to seem afraid, while already calculating whether fear is reasonable. Cade was 38, broad through the shoulders and thicker around the waist than real labor required, with a reddened, weather-beaten face, short, dirty blonde hair, rough stubble, and the permanent expression of a man who believed volume was a substitute for worth. The brown work jacket looked as if it had once belonged to someone more honest. Cade had a reputation that lived ahead of every doorway. Cade pushed around drunks, teenagers, and anybody too decent to swing first. Cade ran errands for powerful men and called it business. Cade also knew exactly how far to go when witnesses were weak and law was bought. Cade paused near Ilara's booth. "Well, if it isn't Queen Ilara." A few people lowered their eyes. Ilara did not. "Good morning, Cade." The tone was flat and almost polite, which seemed to offend Cade more than anger would have. Cade dragged out the chair across from the booth without invitation and sat down backward, arms folded over the backrest, like a boy performing toughness for an audience. "Heard your son's back in town," Cade said. "He planning to fix everybody's life for them?" Ilara buttered toast with careful hands. "My son is here to see family." Cade smirked. "Funny. Folks are saying your family's suddenly real interested in town business. Folks are saying you've been talking." Ilara looked at the newspaper, then at Cade. "Folks say many things when they're afraid of the truth." That landed. Doris glanced up. Mia stopped pouring coffee at another table. Cade's jaw moved once. "You ought to be careful," Cade said. "This town runs on people minding their place." Ilara said, "My husband built fence in this county before you were old enough to lie badly. Don't talk to me about place." The linemen went silent. One of them set down a mug a little too hard. Cade stood. The chair legs scraped the floor. Cade leaned one fist on the booth table so hard the condiment rack rattled. "Old people always think rules still protect them," Cade said. "But they don't. Not anymore." Ilara's face did not change. "That is not strength talking. That is cowardice borrowing a louder voice." People remembered that sentence later. They repeated it in barber shops, church basements, and grocery aisles after the whole town cracked open. At the time, it only made Cade's ears turn red. Cade reached for Ilara's newspaper and flung it aside. Mia started forward, but Doris caught Mia's wrist under the counter. Not because Doris did not care, because Doris knew how these men worked. They waited for an excuse and then blamed the damage on the person who bled. "Apologize," Cade said. Ilara remained seated. "No." Cade stared for a second, as if the answer had come from a language not taught in Aspen Ridge anymore. "Apologize," Cade said again, louder. Ilara said, "No, Cade. Sit down somewhere else or leave." The room became so quiet, the friar hissed like weather. Cade's hand shot out faster than anybody expected. The slap cracked through the diner with a sound too sharp for the room that held it. Ilara's head snapped sideways. The coffee cup tipped. The saucer shattered. Ilara slid against the edge of the booth and hit the tile hard enough for the breath to leave in a stunned little gasp. Mia screamed. A fork clattered. One of the linemen half rose and then froze when Cade turned. That was the ugliest part. Not the violence itself, but the stillness after. The room full of adults who had been trained by years of small corruption to weigh conscience against consequence in real time. Then the bell over the front door rang. Owen Wilson stepped inside with the cold at his back. Owen was in the early part of 30, clean-shaven, angular, hard-faced in the way some men become after service, not because they are cruel, but because they have learned the price of hesitation. Blue-gray eyes took in the room in one sweep. The short undercut was neat, almost severe. The green digital camouflage uniform was immaculate, fully buttoned, properly fitted, black belt centered, black boots planted with the kind of balance that announced discipline before speech. Beside Owen moved Shadow, a Belgian Malinois with a deep fawn to mahogany coat, black facial mask, upright ears, and dark amber eyes that read tension faster than most humans. Owen had planned to pick Ilara up after breakfast. Instead, Owen saw coffee on the floor, an old woman on the tiles, and Cade Jennings standing over the place where dignity had just been struck. Nothing in Owen's face exploded. That frightened Cade more than shouting would have. Owen crossed the distance in 4 controlled steps and dropped to one knee beside Ilara. "Mom?" Ilara opened one eye and tried to wave off concern, in the same stubborn way Ilara had probably waved off weather, debt, grief, and bad news for 40 years. A red mark was already rising across one cheek. Owen helped Ilara sit up, one arm steady under the shoulders. Shadow moved ahead without command, placing body and gaze between Cade and the fallen woman. The dog made no noise. The dog did not need to. Cade took one involuntary step back. "What happened?" Owen asked, though the answer was written across the room. Ilara's voice was thin but clear. A man forgot what kind of town he wanted to live in. Owen stood. The room seemed to remeasure itself around the movement. Cade laughed once, too hard. "Watch your dog," Cade said. Owen's eyes lifted at last and settled on Cade like a door locking. "Watch yourself," Owen said. And in that moment, before the sheriff arrived, before the mayor started making calls, before the FBI ever turned onto Main Street, Aspen Ridge got the first clean look it had taken in years at the difference between a bully and a man. For several seconds after Owen Wilson stood up, nobody in Mountaintop Diner moved with confidence enough to belong to the moment. Cade Jennings had spent years surviving on the certainty that most people would rather swallow disgust than invite retaliation. That habit still owned the room, but not in the same way anymore. Owen's presence changed the air because Owen was not wondering whether confrontation was worth the cost. Owen was measuring angles, distances, exits, injuries, witnesses, and variables. Shadow remained planted between Cade and Ilara, body slightly forward, paws quiet on the tile, ears high, eyes fixed. The Belgian Malinois looked less like a threat than a conclusion that had already been reached. Cade tried to recover swagger by lifting the chin. "You don't get to come in here and run things," Cade said. Owen's voice stayed level. "Nobody's running anything. Nobody leaves until I know my mother is safe and emergency services are on the way." Doris was already reaching for the phone. Mia knelt on the other side of Ilara with napkins and trembling hands. One of the linemen muttered, "I saw it," then seemed startled by the sound of the own courage. Owen took off one glove-free hand and checked Ilara's pupils with the ease of a man used to triage under pressure. "Any dizziness? Neck pain? Trouble breathing?" Ilara answered in clipped phrases, irritated more by fuss than by pain. "Face hurts. Pride hurts. Neck is fine. Don't scowl like that." The line nearly broke the tension, but not enough. Owen helped Ilara back into the booth instead of lifting Ilara immediately. That told everybody else 2 things at once. The son was not panicking, and the son had training broad enough to matter. Cade looked around for support and found only fragments of the old arrangement. Some people still looked away. Some still feared. But fear had shifted. Now the room feared what came next, not what had already happened. "It was an argument," Cade said. "Nobody died." Owen turned, slow and direct. "You struck a 78-year-old woman in public," Owen said. "Don't downgrade your crime because you dislike the consequences." Cade's mouth tightened. "Crime? You sound real proud of yourself." Owen ignored the bait. Mia, did the security camera catch the booth? Mia blinked. Yes, front angle and register angle. Owen nodded once. Good. Doris, please preserve the footage and do not let anyone remove or overwrite it. Doris, who had been bullied by 3 different administrations and 1 bad marriage, looked at Cade as if Cade were suddenly made of something smaller than meat. Nobody touches my system, Doris said. Sheriff Brody Kent arrived 8 minutes later, broad as a doorway, mustache trimmed, tan shirt neat, expression already shaped into irritation before facts could interfere. 2 deputies came in behind Sheriff Brody Kent, both younger and both already reading the scene as one that required obedience more than judgment. Sheriff Brody Kent looked at Cade, then at Owen, then at the old woman with the red mark on the cheek, and somehow still found a way to sound inconvenienced. What's all this? Sheriff Brody Kent asked. Cade answered before anyone else could. Misunderstanding. Owen said, assault. The 2 words hung there together like 2 versions of the same America. Sheriff Brody Kent crouched beside the booth and gave Ilara a look that tried to be paternal and dismissive at once. Ma'am, do you want medical? Ilara said, Don't ma'am me like you just discovered manners, Brody. I want the truth written down the first time. One of the linemen coughed to hide what might have been a laugh. Sheriff Brody Kent stood back up. Everybody calm down. Owen's eyes narrowed a fraction. My mother was struck and knocked to the floor. The footage exists. Multiple witnesses saw it. Nobody here is confused. Sheriff Brody Kent shifted weight toward Cade without appearing to move. Sometimes older folks lose balance. The room changed again. Not with shock this time. With recognition. There it was, naked and familiar. Not the assault, but the cover for it. Owen stepped closer. Not aggressively. Precisely. Choose your next sentence carefully, Owen said. The deputies straightened. Sheriff Brody Kent lifted the chin. You threatening an officer? Owen said, I am advising an elected public servant that false reporting, witness intimidation, and destruction of evidence compound the problem. Sheriff Brody Kent glanced at Shadow and then back at Owen. Control your animal. Owen answered, Shadow is under control, are you? Doris looked away to hide a fierce little smile. Paramedics arrived and examined Ilara. No fracture, likely bruising, mild concussion risk, no immediate transport if symptoms stayed stable, but the tech strongly recommended observation. Owen listened, thanked them, and made Ilara promise not to pretend toughness was a treatment plan. While that happened, Sheriff Brody Kent tried to peel witnesses apart and reduce the room to separate, shakier versions of itself. Owen interrupted every attempt without raising the voice once. Statements stay documented, Owen said. No private coaching. You don't get to direct my scene, Sheriff Brody Kent snapped. Then stop directing it away from the victim, Owen replied. The first witness to hold steady was not the strongest man in the room. It was Mia Torres. Hands shaking, voice thin but intact, Mia said exactly what Mia had seen. Cade approached, provoked, demanded an apology, struck Ilara when Ilara refused. Doris backed it. One lineman backed it. Then the elderly couple. The room had not become brave all at once. The room had become ashamed enough to start trying. Sheriff Brody Kent took down the statements with a sour look that suggested every honest sentence cost money somewhere higher up the chain. Owen noticed Cade looking not at Ilara, not at the deputies, not even at Shadow, but at Sheriff Brody Kent. Not for help, for instruction. That was the first moment Owen understood Cade was not merely protected by the local machine. Cade was used by it. When Sheriff Brody Kent finally placed Cade in cuffs, the act looked theatrical rather than moral, like a small sacrifice offered to avoid a larger reckoning. "Disorderly conduct pending review," Sheriff Brody Kent said. "Assault on an elderly victim," Owen corrected. Sheriff Brody Kent did not answer. Cade twisted once in the grip of the deputy and glared at Ilara with more confusion than hate, as if Ilara had violated a script by refusing to play frightened. "This ain't over," Cade muttered. Shadow's ears pricked. Owen stepped slightly to the side, putting body between Cade and the booth with a movement so subtle most people would not have read it. "For you," Owen said. "It might be just starting." After Cade was taken outside, the diner did not return to normal. Normal had been revealed as rot with coffee on top. Owen sat across from Ilara while the sheriff finished paperwork nobody trusted. Ilara dabbed one cheek with a cold pack and looked angrier than injured. "I told you not to scowl," Ilara said. Owen answered, "I'm not scowling. I'm making a list." That actually got a smile out of Ilara. "Your father used to make that same face." Then the smile faded. "Brody was going to bury it." Owen said, "Brody still plans to." Ilara nodded once. "Then don't let Brody." Owen drove Ilara home just before noon. Shadow rode in the back seat, head high, eyes alert through the window. Main Street looked exactly the same as it had that morning. Hardware store, gas station, church steeple, courthouse dome. But Owen had spent enough time in unstable places to know that outward calm meant nothing after a line had been crossed. At Ilara's house, Owen checked the locks, the porch, the side gate, and the gravel drive before making soup Ilara did not want, and staying long enough to make sure dizziness did not worsen. Then Owen called a number from memory, not a local one. The man on the other end answered with no greeting. "You sound like trouble," the voice said. Owen looked out the kitchen window at Aspen Ridge. "Not trouble," Owen answered. "Pattern." The voice went quiet. Owen said, "Public assault. Local sheriff compromised. Witness fear. Old town, small power circle. Maybe bigger than it looks." The man on the other end, a former teammate named Sam Keller, who now worked with a federal task force on public corruption, said, "Start collecting everything. Don't assume the first thing is the only thing." Owen glanced at Shadow, who had not relaxed once since the diner. "Already figured that," Owen said. That evening, Mia called from a blocked number. Mia's voice broke halfway through the first sentence. Somebody had been waiting by the apartment lot. Somebody had told Mia to remember how easy nursing school could disappear if Mia became confused on paper. Owen wrote down every word. Doris sent a text that the diner's backup camera suddenly went dead an hour after the sheriff left. A retired road foreman Owen had never met knocked on Ilara's door after dark and asked whether Owen still knew people in uniform who weren't from around here. By the time the porch light clicked on against full mountain dusk, the question was no longer whether Cade Jennings had hit a widow in public. The question was what kind of town needed that fact erased before supper. The next morning, Owen woke on Ilara's couch before dawn, because old habits did not believe in sleeping deeply inside a threat environment. Shadow was already awake, standing near the front window with that still, forward posture working dogs sometimes carry when the world is too quiet in the wrong places. Nothing moved outside except the branch of the cottonwood scraping once against the porch railing, but Owen had learned long ago not to ignore a dog that had seen patterns humans missed. Coffee went on. Ilara emerged in a robe and house slippers and looked offended to find Owen already making eggs. "You're rearranging my kitchen," Ilara said. I'm feeding my witness, Owen answered. Ilara did not smile right away, but the edge of the mouth shifted. Good. Feed the witness. The witness is angry. That anger turned out to be useful. Aspen Ridge had spent years dividing people into the intimidated and the beneficiaries. Ilara belonged to neither category. By 9:30, Ilara had insisted on returning to Mountaintop Diner with a bruise on one cheek, a straighter spine than yesterday, and a level of public resolve that made half the town uncomfortable and the other half ashamed of not joining sooner. Doris had reopened. One front camera was dead. The backup hard drive, however, had survived because Doris did not trust machines without a second copy. Brody asked a lot of questions about my security system for a man who claims nothing happened, Doris said. Owen took the drive, logged the transfer on paper, and asked everybody in the room to sign the chain of custody sheet. Doris looked impressed. You always do paperwork like you're invading a country? Owen said, Only when people lie professionally. The retired road foreman who had come by the house introduced himself as Walter Boone. Walter was 69, arthritic, careful, and the kind of man who had kept the own counsel for too long, because the town had convinced him silence was the price of getting old in peace. Walter claimed winter road contracts had been padded for at least 4 years. Crews were billed that never rolled. Salt was invoiced that was never spread. County vehicles appeared on paper in 3 places at once. I signed off on some of it, Walter admitted, not looking at Ilara while saying it. At first I told myself I was keeping the worst men from taking the whole thing. Then one day I realized I was the paper they used to hide behind. Owen asked for names. Walter gave 3. One of them was a cousin of Mayor Garrison Thorne. Another was a shell company nobody in town had ever heard of, but that kept winning bids. Mia brought coffee and then sat down at the booth because fear had passed the point of privacy. Mia said the sheriff's younger deputy, Cole Mercer, had tried to visit the apartment that morning, just to clarify what Mia meant. Mia had not opened the door. Doris, arms crossed, announced Mia would not be walking home alone again. Ilara said, Nobody who told the truth yesterday walks alone until this is over. That sentence did more for Aspen Ridge than any campaign speech Garrison Thorne had ever paid to print. People at nearby tables lifted the eyes. One man rose, came over, and said the mayor's office had pressured the sister to sell inherited land below market. After reassessment, notices mysteriously tripled. Another said a veterans' heating assistance fund had vanished 2 winters earlier, while the mayor cut a ribbon for a private lodge expansion. One by one, whispers ceased being private. Owen spent the afternoon building timelines the way some men build fences. Carefully, line by line, knowing the whole thing fails where a single post is weak. Sam Keller called back from Denver and asked for documentation, not outrage. Owen appreciated that. Outrage spent fast. Evidence kept walking. Sam also mentioned the words federal interest for the first time, though Sam warned that a local assault case did not automatically become a larger matter without financial or civil rights patterns. Owen told Sam there was already witness intimidation, potential false reporting, tampering with surveillance, county contract fraud, and intimidation of elderly property owners. Sam was silent for a second. Then Sam said, Keep going. Don't push too fast. Machines like this panic when they feel the first wrench. Mayor Garrison Thorne appeared in person at the diner before sunset, which told Owen more than the actual speech did. Powerful men did not show up unless optics had become unstable. Thorne wore a charcoal overcoat over a navy suit and moved with the easy smile of someone who had spent 20 years confusing polish for virtue. Thorne expressed deep concern for Ilara's well-being and called the assault a regrettable lapse in temper by a troubled local man. Ilara answered, "Regrettable is stepping on a garden hose. A man hit me in public, and your sheriff tried to erase it." Thorne's smile tightened, but did not break. "We all want healing," Thorne said. Owen stood near the counter with Shadow beside the leg. "Healing starts after truth," Owen said. Thorne finally looked directly at Owen. "You're a guest in this town, son." Owen said, "Not in this booth." Thorne's gaze shifted to Shadow. "That dog licensed locally?" Owen almost smiled. "That your first concern?" After Thorne left, Doris muttered, "Well, there it is." Mia asked what it meant. Doris said, "Means the mayor came down here because nobody believes Brody can manage this clean anymore." Walter Boone slid an envelope across the table. Inside were photocopies of purchase orders, invoice numbers, and 2 handwritten notes that looked like internal routing reminders. One note included initials that matched Brody Kent. Another included GT next to a figure too large to be accidental. Ilara said nothing for a full 10 seconds. Then Ilara put a hand over the papers, as if blessing them, and said, "My husband used to say, rot always smells worst when a wall first opens." That night, somebody cut the power line behind Ilara's house. The outage lasted less than 3 minutes, because Owen had already bought portable lanterns, and because rural electric crews in Colorado did not need a committee to do hard things. But Shadow reacted before the lights died. 1 second, the dog was lying by the rug. The next second, Shadow was upright, ears forward, body aimed at the back door. Owen reached the porch in time to catch the shape of a man moving beyond the fence line. Too fast for identification. Too slow to be innocent. Owen did not chase blindly into darkness, because recklessness in a familiar town got good men killed by local fools with borrowed courage. Instead, Owen checked the cut line, photographed the damage, bagged a cigarette butt near the back step, and called Sam again. Sam listened, then said, "You don't have a scuffle anymore. You have pressure. Pressure means exposure risk. Exposure risk means somebody up top is scared." Owen looked out over the black slope of Aspen Ridge. "Good," Owen said. The next piece came from someplace Owen did not expect. The church secretary. Ruth Ellison, 61, neat as ledger paper and twice as observant, arrived the following morning carrying a bank box. Ruth had helped process charity reimbursements for elderly residents after harsh winters. For the last 2 years, county emergency supplements had arrived late, short, or not at all. Meanwhile, the mayor's office kept announcing successful relief programs. "I'm not accusing anybody I can't prove," Ruth said, "but numbers don't misplace themselves in the same direction every time." The bank box contained carbon copies, reimbursement requests, mailed notices, and a handwritten list of seniors who had sold land or missed heating assistance after reassessments rose. Ilara recognized 8 names. 3 were already dead. Owen recognized the shape of the scheme before Owen could prove it. Make life expensive, make support vanish, make sale offers appear from friendly buyers, then build profit on the fear. When Sheriff Brody Kent returned to Ilara's house with a too friendly tone and a warning that outside agitation could bring danger to decent people, Ilara invited Brody onto the porch and told Brody in a voice loud enough for the neighbor across the street to hear that any future conversation would be recorded and witnessed. Brody's eyes flickered. There it was again. That tiny shock corrupt men feel when a person they have already mentally categorized refuses the role. Shadow stood at Owen's side, silent and immovable. Brody left with a threat disguised as concern. Owen watched the patrol car disappear and knew the wall had opened wider. What remained uncertain was not whether Aspen Ridge was rotten. It was how many rooms the rot had already reached. The first federal voice to take the case seriously belonged to Special Agent Rachel Mercer, who arrived in Aspen Ridge in an unmarked SUV with a legal pad, a dark overcoat, and the expression of a woman who had seen too many small-town kings confuse borrowed power with immunity. Rachel Mercer did not promise rescue. Owen liked that immediately. Rachel asked for documented facts, named sources, and verifiable timelines. By then, Owen had enough to fill a diner table. Surveillance backups, witness statements, county invoices, church reimbursement gaps, property reassessment notices, and a handwritten chronology of intimidation attempts. Ilara set down a fresh pot of coffee in the middle of the table and told Rachel, "I don't need anybody dramatic. I need somebody honest." Rachel replied, "Honest is usually less comfortable than dramatic." Ilara nodded. "Good." The more Rachel listened, the more the shape of Aspen Ridge's sickness clarified. This was not one bully indulged by one lazy sheriff. This was a layered machine. Cade Jennings and other rough local men had been used to frighten people who stood in the way of land transfers or public silence. Sheriff Brody Kent cleaned incidents into misunderstandings, lost reports, or mutual disputes. Mayor Garrison Thorne sold growth, safety, and renewal in public, while county money leaked through padded contracts, false vendor billing, and selectively enforced reassessments. What made the pattern ugly enough for federal attention was not only the theft, it was the target selection. Elderly homeowners, widows, veterans, and low-income residents were pressured hardest because resistance from those groups was easiest to isolate and easiest to spin. Cade Jennings, meanwhile, was learning what it felt like to be disposable. Sheriff Brody Kent had bailed Cade out quickly the day after the diner assault, but not out of loyalty, out of containment. Word filtered back through town that Brody had privately blamed Cade for being too visible and warned that if the state or federal people came in, Cade would wear all of it. Cade had done cruel things for years, but cruelty did not prepare a man for the moment. He discovered the powerful did not consider him a partner. Only a tool with fingerprints. Cade started drinking harder. Cade also started noticing what Ilara's bruise looked like in memory. Sometimes guilt does not begin as virtue. Sometimes guilt begins as insult, the dawning realization that even evil men have used you cheaply. Owen spent 2 days moving between interviews, copies, and quiet coordination. Doris knew who had seen what at the diner over the last 3 years. Ruth Ellison knew which assistance files disappeared between church and county offices. Walter Boone knew how fraudulent equipment logs were dressed up to pass inspection. Mia Torres had heard enough careless late-night talk from deputies and county workers to know whose names always surfaced when fear got specific. A mechanic named Luis Herrera produced repair records showing county trucks billed as road active had not left the garage on dates when full labor crews were supposedly deployed. A retired assessor admitted off-record that certain tax reviews arrived pre-leaned toward sale pressure on target properties. Every time Owen added a page, the story got less dramatic and more deadly, because corruption wore ordinary paperwork better than guns. Shadow proved just as useful in rooms where nobody expected a dog to matter. During one interview in the church fellowship hall, a local contractor named Neil Parson arrived uninvited and tried to hover near the box of copied records on the back table. Shadow rose before Owen had even turned. No growl, no lunge, just a direct intercept and a body line that blocked access. Neil laughed too loudly and claimed to be looking for the restroom. Rachel Mercer, who had been taking notes, asked Neil for identification and then kept the driver's license a moment longer than necessary while reading the man's face. After Neil left, Rachel said, "That man is either stupid or sent." Owen answered, "Those categories overlap more than people admit." The deeper they dug, the more often Garrison Thorne's office appeared near decisions involving roadwork, rezoning, winter relief, and sale pressure in the North Ridge tract. That tract mattered because a private resort and luxury home expansion had been quietly planned for the land just above old family properties. If the elderly owners could be pressured out cheap, the payoff would run for years. It was the kind of scheme that seemed bloodless on paper and brutal in practice. Rachel Mercer contacted a financial crimes unit in Denver. Sam Keller passed along a state-level prosecutor's name. The language in the room changed from case to package. And once law starts building a package, time begins moving against the people who had counted on forever. Ilara became the moral center of the whole thing, almost against intention. Reporters from Grand Junction and Colorado Springs started calling after somebody leaked that federal agents were in town. Ilara refused television, refused tears, and refused victim language. "A man hit me because he thought age made me easy," Ilara told one print reporter over the phone. He was wrong. The worst problem is all the people who thought the lie after was normal. That line ran in a regional paper 2 days later. Aspen Ridge woke up famous for the wrong reason. Businesses complained. Church groups whispered. Men who had laughed off Thorne's arrogance for years began asking whether property values might suffer. Sometimes conscience enters through the side door marked self-interest. Rachel Mercer did not romanticize it. Rachel just used the shift. Then the first real crack appeared inside the opposition. Cade Jennings asked to talk. Not to the sheriff, not to the mayor, to Owen. The meeting happened in the back lot of an auto shop after dusk because Cade was not brave enough for daylight yet and not stupid enough to walk into Ilara's house. Cade looked worse than at the diner. Beard grown and uneven, eyes red, hands restless. "I didn't come to confess religion," Cade said. Owen answered, "Good. I'm not clergy." Shadow sat at Owen's boot, watching. Cade flinched at the dog more than at the man. "Brody says I keep my mouth shut. This stays simple," Cade said. "Mayor says I'm getting help. But now there's suits in town. Everybody's acting like they never saw me before." Owen did not rescue the silence. Cade kept going. "I moved people. I scared people. I showed up on porches. Sometimes took cash envelopes from the maintenance yard. I never knew all the books, just names and addresses, sometimes which parcel needed pressure." Owen asked, "Who gave orders?" Cade stared at the dark gravel. "Depends who was standing in front of me. But if the question is where the orders came from, most roads led to Thorne. Brody cleaned. Thorne decided." That was enough to matter, not enough to trust. Owen asked for something verifiable. Cade licked dry lips and said there was a locked file cabinet in an unused office at the county maintenance barn. Paper copies of subcontractor payouts, duplicate invoices, a USB drive Thorne kept there because Thorne did not trust digital systems fully controlled by anybody else. "Why tell me now?" Owen asked. Cade laughed once without humor. "Because I hit your mother, and for the first time in my life, I saw everybody look at me like what I was. Then Brody looked at me like I was something worse. Disposable." Owen held Cade's gaze. "That doesn't erase anything." Cade nodded. "Didn't ask it to." Rachel Mercer wanted the barn searched legally, not theatrically. Warrants took time. Time invited panic. Panic invited destruction. The question became whether there was probable cause enough to move faster with state cooperation while preserving the federal case. By the end of the night, the task force had enough from Cade's preliminary statement, Walter Boone's invoices, and Luis Herrera's maintenance logs to justify emergency action on limited grounds. But if Thorne sensed movement too soon, evidence would burn. Owen left the meeting with a feeling common to operations that balance law and danger. One wrong step and the guilty win twice, once in court and once in the dark. Corrupt systems are most dangerous when they realize paperwork will no longer save them. Garrison Thorne understood that before Sheriff Brody Kent did. Brody still believed intimidation might refreeze the town. Thorne knew the freeze was failing, so the strategy changed from denial to damage control, and damage control in places like Aspen Ridge had a habit of showing up after midnight. The first attempt came at Mountain Top Diner. Doris had closed early and kept the front lights off, but Shadow woke Owen from a chair in Ilara's living room with a low, urgent vibration that was not quite a growl and not quite a whine. Owen's phone lit up almost simultaneously. Motion alarm at diner rear entrance. Owen was on the road in under 90 seconds. By the time Owen pulled behind Mountain Top Diner, one rear window had already been shattered. A figure in dark clothes was inside near the storage corridor. No flames yet, but the smell of gasoline floated sharp and unmistakable through the cold air. Owen did not shout. Owen called Rachel Mercer, then 911, then moved with the efficiency of a man who knew that fire and panic were multipliers of chaos. Shadow entered on command through the busted window line and tracked low, silent, fast. The intruder turned at the dog's appearance and bolted toward the kitchen exit, dropping a red fuel can that sloshed across the tile. Owen intercepted outside. The struggle lasted less than 7 seconds. The masked man turned out not to be a drifter or outsider, but a county maintenance employee named Travis Hobb, a man Walter Boone had identified in the fake labor logs. Travis cried almost immediately when pinned, which told Owen this had not been personal courage, only borrowed orders and a weak man's fear of stronger ones. Travis Hobb said just enough before the deputies arrived to create another fracture. "I was told to scare, not burn," Travis blurted. "Brody said damage, not bodies." Rachel Mercer heard the statement over speakerphone while driving in. Owen repeated it back carefully, forcing Travis to confirm every word. When Sheriff Brody Kent pulled up minutes later, irritation flashed to alarm the instant Brody realized Rachel Mercer was already en route and Travis had spoken in front of recorded calls. Brody tried to take over the scene, but state investigators arrived first through Rachel's coordination. For the first time since the diner assault, Brody stood on a scene that Brody did not own. That should have been enough for one night. It was not. At 2:13 in the morning, Mia Torres called whispering from beneath a stairwell in the apartment complex. Somebody had tried the door handle twice and then knocked in the exact rhythm Cole Mercer, the young deputy, always used. Owen reached the complex before local patrol because local patrol was the problem. Shadow tracked a man moving between parked vehicles at the rear lot and cornered the figure behind a dumpster enclosure without contact. The man was not Cole Mercer. The man was Neil Parson, the contractor who had drifted too close to the records box at church. In Neil's truck sat a disposable phone, a flashlight, and a printed copy of Mia's class schedule from the community college. That was the moment fear stopped being ambient and became organized predation with documents. Rachel Mercer made a choice before dawn: full protective posture for primary witnesses and accelerated coordination with federal prosecutors. Once intimidation targeted a civilian witness after federal contact, the line hardened. Owen helped move Mia to a safe hotel outside town. Doris refused to leave the diner and instead accepted rotating overnight presents from two ranch families who had finally decided silence was more expensive than courage. Ruth Ellison handed over a second bank box. Walter Boone signed a formal statement. Luis Herrera let investigators image the shop computer. Aspen Ridge had spent years living as if nothing could be done because nobody wanted to be first. Now, too many first people existed for the old method to work. Cade Jennings arrived at Ilara's porch near sunrise with blood on one sleeve and terror stripped clean of swagger. Shadow exploded to standing before Cade made the second stare. Owen opened the door with one hand already ready to shut it. Cade lifted both palms. "Not here to fight." Owen said nothing. Cade swallowed. "Brody found out I talked. Two men came by the trailer, said Thorne was cleaning up, said I'd either hold steady or disappear." Ilara, seated in the kitchen chair with a blanket around the shoulders, answered from behind Owen before Owen could decide whether to send Cade away. "Let the fool speak. Fools are finally useful." Cade's mouth twitched as if not sure whether insult from a bruised widow was somehow mercy. In a way, it was. Cade gave them the last operational piece they needed. The USB drive had been moved from the maintenance barn to a lockbox in Garrison Thorne's private office above the old Visitors Bureau on Main Street. Thorne kept sensitive paper in one place, digital leverage in another, and personal cash in a third. Because men who build crooked empires rarely trust the own allies with complete access. Cade also admitted Brody Kent had kept an unofficial incident ledger. Calls handled off-book, names warned, addresses stabilized. That ledger might prove not only cover-up, but pattern. Rachel Mercer got the information relayed to the federal team before 7. By then, warrants were broadening. The day turned public by noon. State vehicles appeared. Unmarked SUVs lingered near county buildings. News vans from outside the region crept toward Main Street. Garrison Thorne did not come out. Sheriff Brody Kent did, and for the first time the sheriff looked less like a man holding order than a man trying to outpace collapse. Brody gave a statement on the courthouse steps about outside interference and mischaracterized local incidents, but even loyal locals heard strain in it. Behind closed doors, Brody pushed deputies to shred, delete, and delay. One deputy refused and called Rachel Mercer directly. Another walked out. Institutions do not collapse all at once. They separate along the fault lines where conscience was buried but not killed. Owen spent the late afternoon driving Cade, under protective watch, to a temporary interview site outside town. Cade did not deserve pity. Owen did not mistake cooperation for redemption. But Owen understood hierarchy, pressure, and the strange moment when a bad man realizes the powerful never planned to save him. "I know what everybody thinks," Cade said from the back seat. "I'm not asking anybody to forgive anything." Owen kept eyes on the mountain road. "Good." Cade looked out the window. "But the mayor ain't what people think either." Owen answered, "No. Worse." That shut the car up for the remaining 20 miles. That night, the town held its breath, not because nobody knew what was happening, because now everybody did. Federal agents entered Aspen Ridge just after dawn, in the quiet, efficient way institutions move when they do not need to perform strength because strength already exists in signed warrants and coordinated teams. Main Street filled not with sirens at first, but with doors opening at unusual hours, radios clipped to jackets, and the unmistakable posture of people who had come for work rather than spectacle. Rachel Mercer rode in the lead vehicle heading toward the sheriff's office. A second team moved on the county maintenance yard. A third secured records at the assessor's annex. By 7:15, Aspen Ridge had more law in 1 square mile than it had seen honestly deployed in a decade. Sheriff Brody Kent tried to stall. Brody demanded jurisdictional clarification, then counsel, then delay for document retrieval, then claimed certain files had already been transferred to storage. The problem with lying to trained investigators is that trained investigators expect the first lie before the coffee arrives. Brody's office was secured in 9 minutes. 2 computers were seized. 3 document boxes labeled with road maintenance codes were removed. Hidden behind framed commendations in Brody's inner office, agents found the unofficial incident ledger Cade had described. Addresses, names, notes. Widow, push sale after winter. Veteran son away. No press risk. Handle Cade. Rachel Mercer read the pages with a flat expression that looked colder than anger. Rot on paper always does. At nearly the same time, state and federal investigators entered Garrison Thorne's office above the old Visitors Bureau. Thorne was not there. The secretary, white-faced and shaking, said Thorne had arrived early, made 2 phone calls, and then driven toward the private overlook above Frostline Lodge. Agents searched the office anyway. The lockbox was hidden behind a shelf of tourism brochures and Chamber of Commerce awards. Inside lay cash bundles, handwritten notes, a second phone, and the USB drive that linked shell vendors, private transfers, county contracts, and pressure purchase schedules. The files did not merely imply corruption. The files organized it. Parcel maps, elderly ownership clusters, risk notes on resistant families, talking points for public meetings designed to soften future seizures. Ilara Wilson's name appeared in a list of influence-resistant holdouts. Rachel Mercer stared at the screen and said mostly to herself, "They built a business model out of human pressure." Word spread through town faster than any official statement. People gathered on sidewalks pretending not to gather. Church ladies who had kept peace for years suddenly had opinions. Men who had praised Thorne's development plans began explaining to one another that they had always had questions. Doris Hale opened the diner, turned the closed sign to open with visible force, and served coffee to whoever needed to sit down while history kicked the door. Ilara came in around mid-morning with Owen and Shadow. The bruise on Ilara's cheek had yellowed at the edges, which somehow made the injury look older and more accusing. Nobody in the diner missed the symbolism. A whole town had aged in 10 days. Cade Jennings was transferred under cooperation status before noon, and the formal statement landed like a hammer. Cade named who sent him, where cash changed hands, which porches had been visited, and how Brody Kent's office handled reports that needed to disappear. Cade did not soften guilt, did not ask for sympathy, and did not spare self-description. "I liked fear because fear made me feel big," Cade said in one recorded interview. "Then I learned I was only big to people weaker than me, and small to the men I was serving." It was not redemption. It was the first honest sentence Cade had likely spoken in years. Garrison Thorne was found at Frostline Lodge before agents physically reached the Overlook cabin. Thorne had locked the door from inside. By the time entry was forced, the mayor had already ended life with a pistol from a desk safe. No dramatic note, only a legal pad with half a sentence. "I was trying to keep the town alive." Rachel Mercer later said men like Thorne often rewrote greed as stewardship because it let them admire the mirror while ruining everyone else's. Aspen Ridge did not grieve Thorne so much as stare at the fact of Thorne. A polished public man, dead alone above a town Thorne had called home while stripping pieces from the people under it. The arrests continued into late afternoon. Travis Hobb, Neil Parson, 2 county clerks, 1 assessor's aide, a deputy who had falsified service calls. Sheriff Brody Kent, led from the courthouse side entrance in handcuffs with the jaw set hard enough to crack pride on camera. Somebody in the crowd did not cheer. Somebody in the crowd said, "About time." The statement was better. Cheering can become entertainment. About time is closer to civic truth. That evening, Aspen Ridge packed the church hall for a public briefing. Rachel Mercer laid out the process, not the theater. Ongoing investigation, financial tracing, victim outreach, property review, witness protection, state coordination, restitution paths where possible. Then Rachel invited residents to come forward with additional documentation. Nobody moved for 2 seconds. Then Ruth Ellison stood. Then Walter Boone. Then the sister of the man pressured into selling North Ridge land. Then a veteran whose heating grant had vanished. Then a widow whose reassessment had doubled after refusing to sign a development conversation letter. By the end of the meeting, the line of people waiting to speak stretched down the fellowship corridor. Communities do not heal when heroes save them. Communities heal when enough ordinary people decide they are done lending silence to evil. Near the end, someone asked Ilara if Ilara wanted to say anything. Ilara rose slowly, one hand on the back of the folding chair, not because weakness demanded it, but because age had earned the right to move at the own speed. Owen stood nearby. Shadow lay at the edge of the aisle like a guard carved from patience. Ilara looked at the room for a long time before speaking. "Some of you saw what happened to me," Ilara said. "Some of you saw it before it ever happened in that diner. Because men like Cade don't become men like Cade in a healthy town. They become that way because too many people make room. Not all at once. One excuse at a time. One quiet look away at a time. This is not a story about me being strong. It is a story about all of us getting tired of being weak in the same direction." The church hall went silent enough to hear old heat pipes tick. Then somebody cried softly. Then somebody else clapped once, embarrassed by the sound. Then the whole room rose. Outside, after the meeting, snow began falling in small dry flakes that did not stick but changed the streetlights anyway. Aspen Ridge looked almost beautiful in that kind of weather, which was part of how bad places survive so long. Beauty makes denial easier. Owen stood beside Ilara under the church awning while people came by to squeeze hands and avoid saying sorry because sorry felt too small. Cade was gone to a secure location. Brody was booked. Thorne was dead. The machine had not disappeared, but it had been named. Owen looked down at Shadow, who watched the drifting snow with the same attention the dog gave everything important. "You did good," Owen said quietly. Ilara heard and answered. So did the dog. Justice changed Aspen Ridge less dramatically than people from outside expected, and more deeply than many locals understood at first. There was no single sunrise where the town suddenly became innocent again. That would have been a lie of a different kind. What happened instead was slower, rougher, and better. Records had to be sorted. Properties had to be reviewed. Emergency assistance had to be reissued. Deputies had to be replaced. Trust, once damaged by years of quiet theft, did not regrow because a press release announced reform. It regrew because ordinary actions started matching public words again. A plow actually came when billed. A widow got the heating check that had the name on it. A complaint filed on Monday existed on paper on Tuesday. In small towns, integrity is rarely glamorous. It is visible in whether a person must beg for things already owed. Ilara became an unwanted local symbol and handled the role with disciplined irritation. People brought casseroles, flowers, cards, and too much pie. Ilara accepted only the pie worth accepting. The bruise faded from yellow to memory, but the story of the slap never quite left the county. Mountaintop Diner framed the repaired front camera receipt next to the register because Doris claimed it was the most honest invoice this town has seen in years. Mia Torres returned to work under a scholarship fund created by donations from 3 counties after regional papers covered the witness intimidation. Nursing school no longer looked like a fragile dream. Ruth Ellison volunteered 2 evenings a week, helping older residents challenge fraudulent assessments. Walter Boone testified twice and slept better after both. Owen stayed longer than planned. That surprised no one, except Owen. The original intention had been a short visit to check on Ilara, eat breakfast, and head back to contracted K-9 training work in another state. But towns in recovery create a different kind of mission. Somebody needed to help older witnesses navigate federal interviews without fear. Somebody needed to coordinate safe escorts for residents still nervous about retaliation. Somebody needed to translate official language into practical steps. And because fear does not leave all at once, somebody needed simply to stand in public spaces until people remembered what safety felt like when it was not rented from the wrong men. Owen and Shadow became that presence without ceremony. Post office, diner, church hall, hardware store. Quiet watchfulness became civic medicine. Cade Jennings entered the aftermath under no illusions. Cooperation reduced some exposure and increased other responsibilities. Cade was charged. Cade testified. Cade also started work release under heavy supervision months later on projects nobody envied, replacing broken railings at senior homes, hauling debris from county lots, repainting neglected public fencing, helping rebuild a storage shed behind the church. Nobody trusted Cade. Cade did not ask to be trusted. That mattered. One afternoon, Ilara saw Cade at the memorial garden by the veterans' lot, kneeling in cold dirt, hands muddy, fixing a split hose line. Ilara did not speak. Cade looked up once, lowered eyes, and kept working. It was not absolution. It was only labor. But honest labor has saved worse men than pride ever did. The state appointed an interim sheriff from outside the region while elections were prepared. Rachel Mercer came back twice more to tie off interviews, and once simply to drink coffee at the diner on personal time. Which was how Owen knew Rachel finally believed Aspen Ridge might survive itself. The resort project above North Ridge died when financing fled and land transfers were frozen under review. Families who had sold under pressure entered restitution proceedings. Not all losses could be undone. Time and death had already made that impossible. But enough could be corrected to make the effort wholly in a civic sense. In places wounded by corruption, repair is often the most moral form of grief. By early autumn, Mountaintop Diner had become the unofficial headquarters of a new town culture that nobody would have admitted needing a year earlier. Veterans met there on Wednesdays. Seniors used the back room on Fridays to review assistance forms. Mia posted nursing school acceptance papers on the bulletin board. Doris refused to move them lower despite complaints about clutter. Hope is decoration now, Doris said. Owen started a small Saturday skills workshop for local teens. Basic first aid, winter roadside safety, map reading, emergency communication. Shadow was, predictably, the main attraction. Children who had once been told to keep distance from working dogs now learned what calm discipline looked like in motion. Owen used that opportunity to teach a quieter lesson too. Protection was not domination. Strength was not noise, and real authority never needed to humiliate anyone weaker. Ilara watched all of it with the same expression Ilara wore when bread came out of the oven exactly right. Satisfaction kept carefully smaller than pride. One evening, while washing dishes after supper, Ilara said, "You know your father would have pretended this was all fate so he didn't have to admit he was proud." Owen dried a plate. "You're saying you're proud?" Ilara sniffed. "I'm saying don't fish for compliments in my kitchen." But after a pause, Ilara added, "You stayed." Owen looked out the window toward the fading line of mountains and the porch where Shadow slept with one ear up. "Yeah," Owen said. "I did." The town held a simple dedication before winter, not a festival. Aspen Ridge had become suspicious of performance, just a gathering at the small public square where a plaque was placed for community courage and lawful service. Ilara hated the wording and said so. Doris cried anyway. Rachel Mercer sent a note. Ruth Ellison read a prayer for clean hands and brave hearts. The interim sheriff spoke for less than 4 minutes, which was the first sign of improvement in local government. Then Owen was asked to say something. Owen stood at the microphone, looked at the people gathered in coats and gloves and ordinary faces, and chose honesty over grandeur. "What happened here wasn't saved by one person," Owen said. "A line got crossed in public. After that, enough of you decided silence would cost more than truth. That's the part worth remembering. Not the worst thing that happened. The moment people stopped helping it survive." Snow returned to Aspen Ridge a week later, soft and early. On the first real storm morning, Ilara took the Buick only as far as the diner, though Owen had offered a ride. Habit matters, so does dignity. Inside Mountaintop Diner, coffee steamed, bacon snapped on the griddle, and the front booth, Booth 7, was already waiting. Ilara sat. Doris brought the cup. Mia came over with fresh local paper and a grin that no longer carried fear under it. Through the window, Ilara watched Owen cross the sidewalk in uniform, Shadow at the same steady side, both cut against the white morning, like something clean and hard the town had needed before it knew how to ask. The bell over the door rang. Some sounds, once linked to terror, can become promise if enough truth survives them. Ilara lifted the coffee, looked at the sun, the dog, the room, the people who had stayed, the people who had changed, and the people still trying. Aspen Ridge was not innocent. But Aspen Ridge was finally honest. For a town, that was the first real beginning. Sometimes God does not send a miracle as lightning from the sky. Sometimes God sends courage into an ordinary room at the exact moment fear thinks it owns everyone inside it. This story is a reminder that truth may be delayed, but truth is never dead when even one faithful heart is willing to stand. In daily life, many people face smaller versions of this battle: silence, pressure, injustice, and the temptation to look away. Do not forget that grace often works through steady people, clean choices, and brave voices. If this story moved you, please share, comment, and subscribe to K9 and Seal Stories. May God bless every person watching, protect your home, strengthen your heart, and guide your steps.